So when we left off, I was trying to make this tree match, and I showed with Magic Wand how we could get rid of the white space behind it, even though it left these little spots of debris. But because they're softened, they're not that bad, because I had that 2-pixel feather on them. If they weren't softened, they'd look really bad. They'd look like a bunch of little, 8-bit white space invaders. But notice how the tree does not match, does not look good, because the colors are all wrong. So how do we fix that? We do it with levels. There we go. That will show up a little bit better. Color balance, because this tree is way too warm on the top of this mountain. So I'm going to push its shadows towards the blue. I'm going to push its midtones towards the blue and the cyan, so it looks colder. I'm going to push its highlights towards the blue as well. This is just so far in the background that that's really all there is to it. And then I can kind of move it down into the mountain a little bit, and then take my eraser. This is zooming in a lot, far more than we need to zoom in. It's at 300%, which I don't usually zoom in. Never go more than 200%. But it's just to show you in the video how you really can control all of these different pixel choices just with your lasso if you need to. Especially if you have the feather on. So I'll have the mountain overlap it right there. And now this tree is coming out. And if I want to refine it, though this is such fine detail in the print, it doesn't even matter. Because this is actually what it is at print resolution. But at actual size, this is how big it is in the print. All right, so I've got that tree on the top of the mountain. Next layer. I use that big tree again. And shows how you can use the same reference in different ways, but we're going to cut it out the same way. Magic Wand, contiguous turned off. This time I'm going to change its tolerance to 16 to be a little bit pickier with its whites. But I got to make sure I'm on the right layer. I don't like how Photopea does that. It always lags in layer selection. Okay, there we go. Now I've got the 2-pixel feather. But you can see it leaves a lot of debris still. So I'm going to hit delete a few times, and that will bite away at it. And then Command D to deselect. So that's pretty nicely cut out. And now I get to play with all those direct adjustments. So one thing is my levels. I always start there. And I want to brighten it up. So I'm going to push that mid-tone to the left. Next, image adjustment, color balance. And because this is now in the middle ground, I don't want it to be so bright yellow, but I don't need it to be as blue as the far background, right? As things come towards us, they warm up. So I'm going to push it a little bit away in the highlights from yellow and away from red into cyan. It's always good to start in the midtones because that kind of gives you the biggest impact right away. Push it away from green. That's going to help a lot towards magenta. And then in the shadows, I might even choose to warm it up a little bit with a little red and yellow. Now, that's color balance. That made a big difference. Levels made a big difference. So that's what it was before. That's with levels. That's with color balance. Now with image adjustment, hue saturation, this is my protractor. I don't always need it, but it could be fun to just shift its hue because I don't like that toxic green it has. So I can shift it a little bit to the left. And if I really don't like one color in it, like that green, I can actually select just the yellows and just play with the hue of the yellow. So push that a little bit further. Then go back to doing all of them. And then I can take its saturation, just push it down a little bit. I don't want it to be super intense, right? That doesn't match. So instead, I'm just going to take it down a little. Just beautiful night tree. Okay, next, on top of that, this tree. This gets more complicated now. But I'm going to do the same thing I did with the white, except this time I'm going to do it with the blue. Magic wand, select it everywhere, but I got to be in the right layer. And you see it selects all the blue everywhere. But this time, big difference. Instead of hitting delete, which will also remove all this blue, which I don't necessarily want it to remove, I'm going to use the selection, like I showed you before, as a stencil. So now when I use the eraser, it's only going to be able to erase where that blue is. And I'm careful not to go down here. And that way I can actually keep a little bit of that blue if I want it, because I'm erasing at a 52% opacity. Let's hit Command D, see how that looks. And that's okay. But what's the bigger problem with this? Is that I have these arbitrary hard edges. So I want to get rid of those. But I want to keep them sharp, but not in a rectangle. So what I'm going to do is use my lasso with 2-pixel feather, and I'm just going to cut out the shapes I want to keep. See if that's going to work. Yeah, it works okay. Because I have the tree underneath that's kind of filling in. So this is the very hands-on way to control your edges. Blend these trees together. Really thin out these really big branches. Always can do Command Z if you push it too far. So these are unique problems depending on your reference, right? And trees are some of the most compelling but complicated organic elements we have to composite with in settings. There are certain rules to how trees form that concept artists will learn, just like there are kind of natural rules to everything. Leonardo da Vinci wrote about a lot of them in his sketchbooks during the early 16th century. But that gets more into the specifics and the profession of setting design as a concept artist. And here we just get to play with some of these tools and approaches as we find them. So I'm just punching holes, making this tree into something more or less believable as this weird kind of fantasy shape. I love all of its internal shadows, and I haven't played with its coloring yet. I haven't played with its direct image adjustments yet to help it match the one behind it. And I haven't erased away from the one behind it because I don't need this stuff from the one behind it. So I'm going to use my eraser and start taking that back. Well, maybe not all of it. Let's see. I'll use my lasso and I'll take it back from here Let these brambles stay. And then delete just by erasing these areas. It's really cool, all the things we can do. All right. I like those. Don't know if I love this one. Let's get rid of that branch. So it looks a little bit too much like the one up on the mountain. All right. And go to here. And all this kind of blending, right, layer by layer. Now I can always do that magic wand trick again if there's a frequency of blue I missed. And then I use my eraser to clean it up. But it all is because of the feathering on the options. So even something as complicated as all these branches and trees, you can get a pretty good looking cutout. And I'm just using the pressure sensitivity of my eraser to bite away at some of the edges. And then I can always just use my lasso for a more direct approach. Okay, next. This part of the tree. Got so many. And by now you kind of know how this works. I do my image adjustments with levels, and I'm finding my way as I go. I got to be on the right layer. Keep selecting the wrong layer. You know, before I do that tree, why don't I play with the direct adjustments for this tree? So something I'll be encouraging you to do a lot is to play with these image adjustments. I'm going to limit the highlights a little bit. I'm going to play with the color balance. You should do it for every layer, and you should really feel like you have control of the coloring and lighting of your different composite layers. It makes a big difference. I'm going to warm up its highlights. And sometimes it's hard to use these dials with your tablet, so that's why I like to also have the mouse plugged in or have my trackpad. And now when I layer up on top of it, I go to those image adjustments again, start with levels, and I decide, stop. I just need to be really conscious to select the layer first instead of just clicking on it. So, image, adjustments, levels. Do I want to darken the midtones or brighten them? It's funny, I think I actually want to brighten them in this case because it's the trunk I'm most interested in. I'm just going to limit the highlights a little. Then I go to color balance, and this I have to take out a lot of those yellows and greens from the midtones. I'm looking mostly at the bark. Not worried so much about the branches and the leaves. The shadows, I'm going to put more blue, a little less red. There we go. And the highlights, I can put a little bit of that warmth back in. Just because it's cool looking. All right, so now this is organic texture into organic texture. So I have to get rid of those hard edges. So I use my eraser at 100% opacity, pressure sensitive with the tablet, pretty